The NBA schedule is out, and it's not kind to the Pelicans. A tough start, brutal travel, but there are two stretches where the Pelicans can save their season. Let's break it down in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday, final show of the week for Locked On Pelicans, and the NBA schedule is out. So we're going to break down some of the toughest stretches, why an important start is there. I've got the statistics on rest advantage and all of that for you. We're going to look at where the Pelicans can save their season and a couple of other stats with the schedule as well. We're going to break it down fully in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control over your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the number one Pelicans podcast covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well and become an everydayer. That means you listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every weekday at 10:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. And by the way, if you're an everydayer, let me know in the comments down below. I see y'all there. So let's get into it. The NBA schedule released, and they did, the league office did the Pelicans no favors whatsoever when it comes to this. The schedule is very tough. And look, when you look at the schedule here, one of the stats I'm going to share with you is strength of schedule. But more or less, every team kind of plays every team and plays a similar schedule. Almost every team in the West is going to have a similar-ish strength of schedule compared to teams in the East, right? The East is weaker than the West. The West is brutally tough. Thus, teams in the West playing at least 3 games against every other West team versus just 2 games against Eastern teams. That's going to kind of do it here. And then which teams you play, 2 or 3 times, or 3 times versus 4 times is going to do it. For the Western Conference, they play every Western Conference opponent 4 times except Denver, Golden State, Oklahoma City, Sacramento, and Utah and Portland. They get 2 of those Denver games at home. Golden State is 2 at home. You only get OKC once at home, 2 on the road. Sacramento once at home, 2 on the road. Utah, which is less worrisome, 1 at home, 2 away. And then Portland is 2 home games, 1 away games. So that kind of factors into this with the first stat that I want to share. And this all comes from Positive Residual, which is the greatest site when it comes to strength of schedule and schedule stuff. The Pelicans have the toughest strength of schedule in the league. Again, most are Western Conference teams at the start. Phoenix is 2nd, Portland is 3rd, right? Dallas is 4th, Golden State is 5, Memphis is 6, the Spurs are 7, and then you finally get to Brooklyn at 8 when you finally get an Eastern Conference team. So don't read too much into it, but look, it's definitely a thing here. What you want to look at more are rest advantages versus rest disadvantages, and that's where this hurts New Orleans a little bit too. A rest advantage means you just have rest where your opponent doesn't. This isn't going to factor in things like the Pelicans have 3 days off, the opponent has 2 days off. As long as you have 1 day off, studies have shown you will be fine. You'll be fine at that period of time, and that having extra days doesn't tend to make much of a difference. The Pelicans have a true rest advantage in 8 of their games this season. That is tied for 2nd fewest in the league. There's 3 teams that have 7. The Pelicans are in a group of 5 other teams with 8. Rest disadvantages. The Pelicans have 11 games with a rest disadvantage. That's on the higher side. One team has 14. A number of teams have 12. Then a number of teams have 11. The lowest is 6 and 7, basically. So they're not great there. Back-to-backs, the Pelicans are right in the middle. There's teams with 13, 14, 15, or 16 back-to-backs. The Pelicans have 15 back-to-backs. Honestly, the difference between 15 and 13, be better to have 13. but it's not 16. I don't know. It's about kind of the same thing. In terms of miles traveled, this one means less to me than other things. Pelicans are right in the middle. So those are kind of the stats when it comes down to it here. But the Pelicans' start is what worries me the most. Their first 10 games are hard here. 4 of them are on the road. 4 of them are at home, 6 are on the road, and you're playing 8 Western Conference teams and 2 Eastern Conference teams, with one of those Eastern Conference teams being Boston, which could go either way. You start off at Memphis, at home versus San Antonio, at home versus Boston, on the 3-game road trip at Denver, at Clippers, at OKC, home versus Charlotte, then at Dallas, at San Antonio, and at Phoenix. When you look at those games here, I think it's 1, 2, 3. I might have messed up my counting here with how many are on the road. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 7 road games and 3 home games. I really can't do math here. I was an English major. It's rough, right? You could easily get off to the only winnable game there that you pencil in as a win is Charlotte. You could see a 1-9 start. I'm not as worried about, say, a team like Phoenix in there as much. Boston at home at least is kind of a good thing. But that's a tough stretch to start the year. That is a very tough stretch to start the year with far more Western Conference teams than Eastern Conference teams too. And that's going to mean building early momentum is difficult here. That's not great because the schedule being as hard as it is over the course of the year, it's tough for this to even out. There are stretches, and we will look at those in the next segment here. But this is not one of those years where the Pelicans can get off to a 1-9 start. You need to try and tread water and be 500 because it does lighten up a little bit, but overall the Pelicans' schedule is pretty balanced. Getting off to a fast start is going to be important for changing narratives around this team, getting this team to believe in themselves a little bit too, and just changing the perception in the city of New Orleans where people feel very down on this team right now. But if you want to make the postseason, not digging yourself out of a hole early makes it a whole lot easier. Games in, February, March, April, where things can be real weird in the NBA at that point in time, not having to rely on must-win games at the end of the year, putting that kind of pressure on you when your bodies are tired and maybe injuries are a thing. That's important. And this schedule, though, with a tough start to the season, really doesn't help New Orleans at all when it comes down to it. So they're going to need to figure out how to really make the most of this early stretch and try and stay 500. 5-5 over the first 10 games would be massively important, I think. And in my opinion, a very big win in a sense for New Orleans to just not be in a hole early and almost have the season over before it begins. This is going to be a very big test for head coach Willie Green, and this is the first 10 games might define his tenure here. The past couple days we've been talking about it could be, in mid-December. You get up to a 1-9 start, you're going to need to make some changes before you kind of go in the we're bad and let's sell off pieces and become sellers at the trade deadline and focus on development kind of thing. It's probably too early to do that. So you're going to make a change at head coach. So a lot can change for New Orleans after these first 10 games, especially given that it's against 8 Western Conference teams that, the only win that you really put in there is Charlotte for sure. That's not a great start to the year. But it does get better. The schedule does lighten up soon after that. So if you can stay out of being in a hole here, the Pelicans could really kind of either soar or position themselves for the postseason pretty easily. Let's look at this mid-season part of the schedule that I do think breaks well for New Orleans. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth. So whether it's 401ks, properties, investments, when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. So that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch Money does all the heavy lifting for you. You can link your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I love that it's got all my accounts in one place. I need to see it all in one place because I'm not going to go to multiple things. Then I'm just not going to manage my money properly. And if you have a partner, say you're paying for a wedding that coincidentally is on a date of a Pelicans home game, so it won't see me there, Monarch Money makes it easy to manage your finances with a partner. You can both see budgets, goals, and spending activity in one place. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network every single weekday, Monday through Friday at 10:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. For your second listen, so scrimmage with the Saints. How did the QBs do? Ross Jackson's breaking it down over at the Locked On Saints podcast, covering everything black and gold. Make Locked On Saints and Ross Jackson your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's get into where the Pelicans can even out their season a little bit. This is a stretch that can either maybe get you back to 500, which is about what it's going to take to get to the play-in tournament in the Western Conference, maybe a little bit above that, or let you really position yourself for a tougher end to the season here. But there's a couple of stretches that I do think really help New Orleans. And that first stretch is from November 12th to December 29th. This is 17 home games versus just 5 away games. That makes it feel a little bit better. In December alone, there's only 3 away games. You have a 4-game homestand, a 3-game homestand in there. In this stretch that we're talking about as well, there's another 5. There's a 5-game homestand, 2 3-game homestands, and a 4-game homestand. That's really encouraging. Look, just sleeping in your own bed, getting into a routine, just having some of that road weariness leave your body is a very important thing. And you're playing some tough teams in that stretch, so at least you're at home. That 5-game homestand is Portland, the Lakers, Golden State, Oklahoma City, and Denver. Getting those teams at home, look, that's a brutal stretch at home, but at least it's at home versus being on the road. The next home stretch you get is Atlanta on 11/22. Won't be there in New Orleans or at the game. Atlanta, Chicago, and Memphis. That's a winnable 3-game stretch right there, I think. Then you get a baseball series against Minnesota after that. You've seen New Orleans play them well. And then at home, you're against San Antonio, Houston, Indiana, and Dallas. Again, some of those can definitely be winnable, I think, before you kind of round out the month with 2 games against Phoenix at home and then New York on the 29th. Having those tough and winnable games there, New Orleans can make a run, and that's where they're going to need to do it. I don't think this team is going to come out of the gates in their first 10 games extremely strong, looking super good and feeling like you can, win all of those games. So you're going to need to really make it up later, and that's a big stretch that New Orleans can do it in. I would say their strength of schedule there is going to be above 500 in terms of opponent winning percentage, but at least they're home games, and it kind of mitigates that to a certain degree. You're going to definitely just need that stretch to be as good as possible because, again, I do think the beginning of the season is really rough. But this is where, the Pelicans can either get back to 500 or surge a little bit. And if they don't, you're well positioned to know what you need to do in January and February, which is transition to becoming a seller here. That's also important to this, November 12th through December 29th stretch, because things do lighten up a little bit in February, in my opinion here. February is a very winnable schedule for New Orleans. When you look at some of the teams they're on the road against, and some of the teams they're at home, they have a 5-game homestand in February against Sacramento, Miami, Milwaukee, Philly, and Golden State. I don't know if Philly's going to be good. I don't know if the Kings are going to be good. Miami's meh, right? They're mid. So is Milwaukee. So will Golden State. Your 5 home games there, you can go 4-1. And then when you look at some of the teams you play on the road in that month, you're at Charlotte and at Utah twice. You don't want to kind of go into January and then early February and be like, we got a chance, and then realize you don't really, or look at some of those kind of wins and losses, even though most of these are after the trade deadline, and that could be fool's gold for what you should have done before, right? You don't want to just beat up on bad teams, be like, look, we're good, when it turns out you're not actually good. But if the Pelicans kind of make it through that mid-November to end of December slate in good shape, they can transition to being like, all right, let's make a trade. Let's start to win some games because February is very winnable. Now, there's a 6-game road trip at the end of February going into the earlier part of March, but 2 of those games are at Utah, so that's winnable. One's at Phoenix, at Sacramento. Those are 4 very winnable away games for New Orleans. Utah is going to be terrible, in my opinion, this year. You know, the 2 toughest games in that 6-game away stretch are the Clippers and Lakers. The Lakers I don't fully believe in. They're going to be tough, but I wouldn't say I fully believe in them, right? And the Clippers being the oldest team in the league, I think that can be winnable too. So you start to look at that and go, okay, if New Orleans can do well there, they're going to be positioned very well to try and make the postseason. So saying all of this, you know, January becomes, we're kind of working backwards here. January becomes a bit of a tough stretch for the Pelicans as well, right? There's a lot of games on the road there. There's 6 home games. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 away games. You know, but you're playing a lot of Eastern Conference teams then. At Atlanta is going to be winnable. At Washington is going to be winnable. At Memphis, I think, can be. At Indiana, yeah. At Philly, yes, if you don't believe in them. You know, you get Portland at home. You get Brooklyn at home. Those are important games. You've got Memphis as well. Detroit, Brooklyn, Denver, Lakers, Portland at home. Those are winnable games for the Pelicans. So that stretch of November, December, January, leading up to the trade deadline, we should have an idea of where this team is if they need to make that decision, which would be, you know, the week before the trade deadline. Well, they should definitely be able to do that, I think. And I think that's at least like a good thing to kind of realize here, of just where you're going to be and have clear delineations of when you need to pivot. And at least the schedule sets them up to kind of make that determination and decide what path they want to go down, because they do need to pick a path. So they're set up in that sense that even if they're not winning games, the schedule, while being tough, can lead to the right kind of outcome for New Orleans of, I don't think they're going to be looking at themselves and have, you know, no clue what this team is. We should have a pretty clear idea based on how the schedule is laid out of, they're going to make the playoffs? Should they push to make the playoffs? Or is this time to trade away some pieces and focus on youth and development and all of that? Because those are things that you're going to need to decide. I don't like the 2 timelines approach and don't think that's something that they should really be doing. Might just depend on the start that they get. Give me your record prediction through those first 5 games. What do you think first 10 games. What do you think the record's going to be? Could be 5-5, could be 1-9, could be better than that. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. So coming up next, let's look at I didn't update. All right, never mind. I will fix that in editing here. I'm looking over at the side on the rundown of today's show, and I forgot to change that. I'll edit that in, and you won't even notice anything. Magic of the show right here. So coming up next, a couple of other notes from the schedule that are important. National TV, we knew wasn't going to be good. It's really not good. We'll look at what's going on with the Mardi Gras trip and a couple of other notes from the schedule as well. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and join over 11,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well, and become an everydayer. Listen Monday through Friday to the Locked On Pelicans podcast. And don't forget, you can watch us on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network as well, every single weekday, 10:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. here. For your second listen, there's no off season. in the NBA, especially with the schedule being released. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast. I'm on there every Friday along with John Krause of Locked On Celtics, covering everything you want to know about the association, trade rumors. We're going to be breaking down the national schedule on there as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. What I'm going to be releasing, I'm going to work on it over the weekend, is the fan survey for the New Orleans Pelicans here. I have a number of questions I want to put in, particularly now that the schedule is out. I'm going to be curious your take on certain things. We're going to be talking about this in the future. We'll have it run for about a week or so. Keep an eye out. I'll put the link in the comments down below. Probably next week when it's done, we'll talk about it on the show, get you to answer the questions here and give your thoughts on everything. I'm looking forward to it, and then doing some shows based off of that and what you are thinking. And don't forget, give me your trades. I want to grade some trades on the show. If you got one that is good, bad, want my opinion on it, throw it in the comments down below. Let me know on Twitter at NolaJake, and we will break it on down. So a couple of other notes here regarding the Pelicans schedule. Only 2 national TV games. Not great. We kind of knew this was coming. It's going to be, the first one is going to be the Pelicans home game against the San Antonio Spurs on December 8th. That is going to be on Peacock, which is now one of the partners when it comes to all of this. Then the next one is going to be the home game January 30th against Memphis. That is on ESPN. Every other game will be on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, unless you make a run, which we'll talk about in a second, to the NBA Cup. But we know this, right? Just if you compare this to Zion's rookie year of 31 national TV games, Pelicans have really fallen off here, right? The season's sparse coverage on national TV basically says the league doesn't expect the Pelicans to be must-see. They're not confident in Zion Williamson's health. They're not expecting consistency. It's just like a deflated balloon in a sense here. It's really disappointing. They're going to need to win to really change the perception around this team right now. So tying into lack of national TV games, we talked a lot about this in yesterday's show. One thing to note is there's only 80 games on the schedule right now. Depending on how the NBA Cup plays out, you can either get 2 games in those knockout stages, or you just get 2 games added. When you look at kind of the calendar of everything, you will see there is no game between December 9th and December 17th. That's NBA Cup dates, quarterfinals, semifinals, then the finals there. Those are all in that stretch. If the Pelicans don't get out of the group stages, 2 games get added. If you make it a little bit further, they adjust it so that every team will play 82 games, but you can end up getting it where like some teams only have like 40 home games versus 41 when it comes to this. Not ultimately that big of a deal, but if you're wondering why there's like a stretch of about a week and a half where there are no games scheduled, it's because those are the like TBD dates for the NBA Cup. Hopefully the Pelicans play 3 games because that means they made the Cup final, if that's the case during that stretch. Also this year, there's no Mardi Gras road trip. It coincides with the All-Star break for the team this year. So that makes it a little bit easier. Fat Tuesday, I think, is on February 17th. The All-Star game is on Sunday the 15th, and there's a couple of days off with everything. The Pelicans won't play again until the 20th. So that makes it a little bit easier, I think, for this team when it comes down to it with all of that. So no traditional like Mardi Gras road trip or anything with that. You know, the big thing that kind of stands out to me with this schedule, to kind of like just sum it up overall, like, I don't know, it's about what you would expect for a Western Conference team. Don't read too much into strength of schedule, because simply most teams in the West are going to have a tougher strength of schedule, whereas some teams won't, right? The Denver Nuggets are kind of the outlier. They have the easiest strength of schedule. Has to do really with, you know, which teams you're playing at home that are 3 instead of 4 in the Western Conference. I haven't looked at the Nuggets, but it's kind of obvious they have some of the the harder teams as 3 games versus 4. That rest advantage and disadvantage really plays a factor into it as well. And New Orleans did not get any real big benefits from that, even if overall, I think their calendar, the schedule is kind of balanced in my opinion, but that's kind of where things stand for this team right now. The schedule did them no favors, really, when it came down to it. But there are those stretches from November to end of December when you have, I lost the numbers that I had in front of me, but you have where was it? 17 home games, 5 away games. We're going to be busy during that stretch here. And then I do think that road trip from February 26th to March 6th, 6 games, isn't as bad as it could be. And February is winnable. The Pelicans feel they're in a competitive franchise. If they're around 500, going into the new year, if you make it through January, come February, they can go on a run and position themselves really, really well to try and win a bunch of games here. It does get a little bit tougher, though, towards the end of the season because you're on the road a bunch, in the 6 games in April, 4 of them are on the road here, and you've got some tough games from late March through the end of the season. But it's doable for New Orleans. They're going to need to come out of the gates hot. We'll see what they can do, and we'll break it down a little bit more on Monday's episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll get the fan survey out to y'all. So we got a lot to cover here. No slowing down. We are still 5 days a week here on the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. This is the Locked On Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'll be back with y'all next week. I appreciate y'all listening.